but the potential exists for there to be harmful commands in the spec file. So we want to use a non-privileged user. And we don't want to use our own user because we don't want to destroy our own home directory. We'd rather destroy somebody that doesn't matter. So what we're going to do is, if you guys already have these tools installed, if not, good luck. You're on the CRL Wi-Fi. But if you can get those packages installed, you know, go ahead and install. And then we're going to run these 3 commands here to make our RPM user, our RPM maker, our RPM builder.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I heard what you said right. You're saying that if you're a developer and you make something and you want to package it for RPM, there's a chance it will trash your system?
Absolutely.
Depending on the commands that you put in the spec file. If you build your spec file improperly, right?
You have,
And there's some commands in the spec file that when the spec file is running, because it's running some of the commands directly from your spec file, you could thrash your home directory.
So it's not because the RPM process is the problem.
It's because you made it up.
It's because you can script inside it. When you have access to being able to script, you can make all kinds of fun and interesting mistakes.
So it's only going to happen if you've done something wrong.
I mean, a lot of it is like IM minus RF, and then whatever you want to clean up. Let's say you make that wrong, and it ends up with a / and a space, and then what you want to write. So you made a little typo, and you run it, and if you're root, you lose your whole system doing that. So you're doing a lot of stuff that if you're root and you can't afford to make mistakes. Particularly if you run it unconstrained with everything else too. You want to make a mistake as an end user because you can maximum screw up your project, not your system.
Yeah, but there's also a sort of an inherent environment control system where you don't make commands that are going to trash your system close to commands that are safe.
But you don't know what's safe until you tested it. Right? You got to have some safety. You don't want to be sawing on what the branch you're sitting on.
Yeah, but if -R is safe, but /R is your system is under attack, that's just dumb. It's sort of whoever made.
Well, I'm going to show you a couple of scripts where you can see. I mean, it doesn't take more than a space somewhere for a command to go wild.
Well,
and I'm just making an example. Like,
I think part of it is the fact that you're downloading a source RPM very often from somewhere. You don't know 100% where that is, complete traceability of that. So you want to run the risk of corrupting your system,
Right.
as opposed to, let's be safe about it, let's put it in a separate sandbox and
Right.
hold it there.
I mean,
where I can extract it, I can inspect it, and everything else.
Yeah, so think about it that way. You know, you got your home directory, the potential exists because when the RPM is being built, scripts are running, you're putting scripts into the spec file, those are being run. You know, maybe there's a typo, maybe there's a mistake, maybe there's just some bad stuff, right? So would you rather thrash all the pictures of your family from the past 2 decades, or would you use a user that doesn't have anything in its home directory and nothing's going to get deleted anyway, so you're kind of in a safe environment. I would use a safe environment. So I'm one of these people who will log into a computer script, so it's okay to see.
I would just set up a build box. It's virtualization at this
Where
point.
you can have a
It's really
build
easy.
box. You know, that's
But you're still losing
really
the
the
whole box.
safest way is to have your own system.
You're still going to
As
have
you
to
can see, I'm
reinstall
not
that
using my
whole
work
thing.
laptop for this, I'm using a VM on my work
You still have to
laptop.
rebuild those.
In a production environment, the safe thing is to have a complete isolated network that you trust and a complete isolated build box. That is your baseline, and what you would do is you would get the packages from wherever, you'd vet those packages, then you'd put them into your environment, test them, and build them on the test machine. When you're ready to deploy it, you then go to your build box, you then build it, and you then sign it there. Everything is isolated, everything's signed. If you're just doing it for yourself, you've got a much looser requirement.
Yep. All right, so for those who are following along, I've created my RPM maker. You can name your RPM account anything you want, RPM builder, RPM maker, RPM guy, right? Name it anything you want. The thing is that you want it to not be your account. You don't want to be an account that has any kind of root access. So, you know, just so we can be safe. Optionally, you can put it into the mock root. As Peter mentioned earlier, there is a system called Mock out there. It creates a root jail for building RPMs. So one of these days, I'm going to experiment with that and play with it a little bit. So I always put my guy into that group
it does a little bit more than,
Yeah.
it builds a complete environment, right? So if you're testing your RPM and you have all these other dependencies, this mark will make a complete isolated build environment.
Yep.
Just to play
Sure.
around with your own package, so you can see, isolate what's gonna happen. And when you're done, you just blow it away and say, okay, I tested it.
Yep. All right, so does everybody who's following along have their user created? Yeah? Awesome.
With instructions.
All right, so the next thing is come over here. All right, so next thing we want to do is we want to set up our build environment. So we're going to switch user over to the RPM Maker account, and then we're going to run RPM dev setup tree. And what that's going to do is it's going to do a couple things for us, and I'll show it to you after it's done. It's going to set up our RPM macros file, which has some instructions in it of our build environment itself, some settings and some system variables. And then it also builds the tree out, the build tree out, the way it needs to be to build an RPM. So it'll create an RPM build directory along with an RPMs folder, a source folder, source RPMs. It says RPMs, sources, spec, and build. It's going to build some extra stuff there for us. So let's go ahead and do that. So first, switch over to RPM Maker. I always use that dash because that gives me the RPM Maker's profile, okay? Which means anything that's in his profile, I have. And then next thing, RPM dev setup tree, and it just returns after a little bit and says, hey, your tree's set up. So when I look, here is my RPM macros file. Where's my mouse? Okay, so here's my RPM macros file. We'll go ahead and look at that in just a minute, and my RPM build folder. So inside the RPM macros file, this is what's there right now. This one's pretty important, the top dir. This signifies the top directory of your build environment. Okay? The rest of it puts in there is, it's just stuff about your computer, your SMP flags, your architecture install information. And that stuff you really don't want to mess with. Okay? We are going to add a couple more files, a couple more lines to this file in a little bit, as soon as we create our GPG key, so we can sign our RPM, so that when people install it, we can make sure that, you know, it is in fact, its integrity is still maintained, right? That nobody's tampered with it, because we don't want people tampering with our RPM files. If you're signing RPMs, if you're installing RPMs and you can't check the signature file, you're putting your system at risk. Okay? You want to make sure that RPMs that you're installing, that they're signed, and that you can verify the signature of those RPMs. And we're going to show you how to do that too here in a little bit. All right.
Is that the preferred method, by the way, nowadays? I didn't, I mean, I knew that, you know, I guess I'd never really checked the signature of an RPM. And I've obviously, you know, checked the SHA, you know, the MD5 sums for ISOs and stuff.
Yeah.
But never actually.
I think it actually, if it's not signed, it'll actually tell you it's not signed.
Yeah, it'll
So
tell
you have
you.
to
It'll tell you,
If
it
you
might
go to
refuse
install-
unless you give it a flag.
Yeah, if you go to install an unsigned RPM, it'll sit there and say, hey, signature's missing, and it'll just end right there. It'll stop.
Okay.
You can put in no GPG check to work around that. But, you know, that's you accepting responsibility if it crashes your system then. Okay, so there is a way around it. By default, it checks. If there is no signature, it gets rid of it. It just dumps out and install.
It's part of what a distribution is, right? We want to make sure that you have something on your system that has been tested by someone else. And the GPG ensures that no one puts in a third, you know, man-in-the-middle attack,
Yep.
plugging in some stuff that didn't come from your favorite distribution.
So the cool thing is, and we're going to cover this in the next couple of slides, 2 or 3 slides. You can create a GPG key, and then you can actually distribute that out to people who you want to be able to install your RPMs. And we'll show you how to import the GPG key, so that if, like I'm creating an RPM, I want you to be able to install it. I'll give you my GPG key. You can import it, and then when you get an RPM from me, the signature will get verified. Does that do that, Chris? Signatures?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 'Cause I don't mess with that. So. All right.
Especially when you're installing from a TPA, it's more serious than because you're not coming from the trusted
Oh, yeah.
to repository. So
All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're in our root directories. And then we're going to make a new EG directory. And then we're going to tell it to GPG gen key. And this is going to ask us just a couple of questions about the key that we want to create. So I'm going to select, you can select either 1 or 2 as your default. Okay, I'm going to select number 1, RSA, and RSA is the default. It's going to ask me key size. Again, I'm just going to accept the default, so it's a big key. Now this is kind of neat. You can make it where your keys expire in a certain amount of time. Okay, since we're just doing this for our own testing purposes. Okay, normally you would want your keys to expire occasionally. A lot of other programs by default will expire a key in 20 years. Some people, DoD, they sit there and they set all of their keys to expire every 3 years, right? Because they don't want keys to be hanging out too long. Jared, do you know how long the regular RPM keys are good for?
I could probably figure that out.
Yeah, so it's probably a good number of years. But since we're just doing this as a way of teaching ourselves something, I'm just going to accept the default and say don't expire my key. Okay, is all this correct? Well, I guess it is. And now I need to put in a real name for myself. So I'm going to enter my name. That's me. My email address. And a comment. I'm just going to put in RPM sign key. And do I want to change all that, or is that okay? I'm going to say it's okay. And now it's going to ask me for a passphrase. This passphrase you'll be asked every time you want to sign an RPM. And now it's going to ask me to do something on the keyboard. And I got to be doing some work.
Can't put the type because all of a sudden we're going to have a problem.
Of course, some other tasks on the keyboard, move the mouse.
It's going to take about a minute or so, man.
Yeah, so. There we go. So now I got some entropy.
No, it's still working.
Oh, need more. Need more. Send me 1 more bytes. I should have created something. Okay, there we go. All right, so as you can see, what's up here on the screen, it gives me my fingerprint, right? And it gives me this. This is kind of an important number. You don't have to remember it, but it'll come up again. But the thing is that now I have this, I have a GPG key. It's created, I'm in good shape. So I have something that can sign my RPMs. But before I can actually sign an RPM, there's a few more things that I need to do. And those are, we're going to make sure that that GPG key exists in our key ring. Then we're going to export the key so that we can create a file on our computer called RPM GPG key and my name. And then we're going to go ahead and import that into the RPM database so that when we go to install an RPM, it can verify the signature of the package with a key that's in this database. All right, so we'll go back to our VM. The screen. So when I do GPG list keys, yeah, this, I guess that helps by typing the whole thing, right? List keys, I can see I have my key right there, okay? If I do GPG, I'm going to tell it to export. The key that I want is my name, because that's how it's listed up above. And I'm going to move that into the RPM GPG key. And I'm going to put my name on the end so that I can recognize what that RPM GPG key is for. So there were no errors there, so that's always a good thing. If I do an ls command, I should see my key, which means it created it. fine. Okay, RPM. Import dash A.
So the GPG key expires, do you have to go back and rebuild those
Yeah.
RPMs again?
Yeah, you'd have to re-sign them, redistribute your key.
You have to do that, it's
The whole point of the key.
A lot of extra
Okay,
work.
so. Oh, I did this as root.
Yep.
And then last thing we're gonna do is make sure that the key is actually in the RPM database. And this command is a little bit screwy. The syntax of it.
EY?
What? Oh, that's not supposed to be an EY. No. Next. Release. Okay, so, oh, that's great. Unknown tag. Name, versions. Okay, so when I actually fix my spelling mistake, you can see that in the RPM database, when I extracted the public keys back out, I can see my Fedora 18 signing key, and I can see my signing key that I made that I can import into the database. So I should be good to go for signing RPMs now. So now my build environment is set up, my RPM signing key is set up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of lines to our RPM macro file. Cylinders, okay. Okay, so these two lines are just going to tell it which key to use when it signs RPMs. So I like to put them right here, up here at the top. You can put them probably anywhere you want. But the two lines you need to add in is %_signature, GPG, so I'm going to use a GPG signature. And then the next line tells it which key to use. GPG name, and the name that you gave your key. All right, and again, this is the macro style. Every time you build an RPM, it's red. So when you pass the sign option, the RPM build command, it's going to look in here and see what kind of signature it's going to apply. It's going to apply a GPG signature, and it's going to use the key, in this case being Tevernal.
You don't need a quote or a,
No.
anything because you got a space in there?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you
You
don't-
don't do it.
Okay,
It's going to read everything out now.
okay.
So try to match it up.
You sure that RPM queue command again is spelled?
Can you see that command again?
Well, I'm getting some kind of error.
Run it as root.
At Q?
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Query shouldn't be root. Okay.
So you should be doing that RPM-Q as, no? LT-QF.
When I look at the pub keys, I have two.
Single touch around everything.
Oh, he double goes with QF,
Just use it.
when I got this curve. It's not a problem. We can go on and do stuff.
Okay.
Just make it work.
Did everybody get this RPM-Q command to work? Those are following along?
We'll double goes with
Yeah.
QF, I know.
Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Fedora 14 doesn't support the RPM.
Does it matter, do you need spaces in between?
Yeah. Space.
But you need double quotes with one QF, not one, like I did, not one.
I just did one.
I'm trying to just one that.
Okay.
Makes all the sense. What difference?
That one you use space. On the other side of the, yeah, space, space.
Was it 14, 13 when we had the big hack?
All right, so you got it? Earth alien?
Now we go back and do the other.
Yeah.
The RPM macros should be, I don't,
Yep,
that's
you're
it,
very
that's
cool.
it. Yep, that's it, oh, no, I don't.
And we should have a file there, say